Hello, it's Larry Clark from Excelsior Music Publishing, and we're here with another Meet the Composer live session. And today we have composer Bruce Tippette, along with choral music educator Adam Aguanno. So I'll send it over to you, Adam, and start asking those questions that your students want to know the answers to for Bruce.
Awesome. Hello, students. Hey, Bruce. Thank you
Hi.
so much for organizing this. My kids are really excited. I think we have some questions that we asked last week. I proposed to them, told them that we were having an interview with you, and I sent them your webpage so they could read a little bit more about your music and about you. And I encouraged them to look through that and to ask some questions that they might want to have for you as a living choral composer. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Where are you located? Where are you from?
I am in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Awesome. My mom lives in North Carolina. She's
Oh.
Wilmington.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I took a look at all my students' questions that they submitted, and I chose, a lot of questions or some questions that I thought were different and, could provide them with as much information that they want to know about, what it's like to be a composer. One of the kind of overwhelming popular questions that a lot of my students had was, what inspired you to become a composer? My sixth grader, seventh grader, Noah Nelson and Barbara Carcanius asked, how did you get into music? And also a lot of students had asked, what inspired you to become a composer?
Okay. Well, it kind of happened maybe by accident. I was in a choir group, a boy choir, when I was 7. I joined, it was the Riley Boy Choir in North Carolina. And I auditioned for the group and I made it. So I was in the training choir and learned how to read music and how it was important for singers to also be able to read very well. And I really got interested in what the accompanist was doing on the piano. So I inquired about taking piano lessons when I turned, I guess I was 10. I started taking piano, and I was still in the choir at that time. I was actually in that group until I was about 13. My voice then kind of dropped, and I was unable to sing the soprano and alto parts anymore. It just kind of happens over a course of a few weeks. So I kind of aged out of the group. But a couple years before that happened, I'd really gotten really interested in playing the piano, and I was playing the Faber and Faber series, those piano adventure books, and I was moving through those really, really quickly. And my dad at the time, I guess I was about 11 or 12. My dad was like the property manager for the boy choir. So he would bring me with him on Saturdays and kind of just do some housekeeping. And there wasn't really much that I could do to help him because he was like fixing electrical things because that was kind of what he did for a living. So there was this beautiful baby grand piano in our rehearsal space, and I would just sit down and just kind of noodle on the piano. And there were a few things that I got really comfortable playing over and over because I had just played it many, many times. And I went to my piano teacher at the time, and I was like, "Hey, I've been playing this thing on the piano," because he could tell that, "Oh, you haven't been practicing your other things. What have you been doing?" I was like, "Well, I've been working on this thing on the piano, and I wanted to see what you thought." And I played it for him, and he was like, "Have you written it down?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "Have you taken what you played and written it down on staff paper?" And I hadn't really thought about it. I was like, "No, I haven't done that." And he's like, he handed me some staff paper, and he was
For
like,
the
"Right."
students who don't know what staff paper is, it's a blank sheet of paper
Yeah.
that has multiple different music staffs on it. So if you're interested in writing music, you can certainly pick up some staff paper to compose.
Yeah, it's just blank. I think you can do like a Google image search now and just print it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had blank staff paper, just those 5 lines and 4 spaces. So I had to write in every single thing. I had to write in my treble clefs, my bass clefs, my key signature, my time signature, and I wrote the piece down. And I didn't really think much of it. I thought of it more of like a music theory assignment. And I brought it into my teacher and I played it for him with it written down. And he was like, "Do you mind if I hang on to this?" I was like, "Sure, I don't care." I mean, I was like 12, I think, and I didn't think much of it. I was like, "Sure." So the next week I came back to a lesson and he had put all of the music into the computer and made it like a printed copy, like he had engraved it. And I was like, "That's cool. I really, really like that." And I asked him, I was like, how did you do this? And he told me about the software he was using. I think at the time he was using, I think it was called Encore. It's like this old version of like a less expensive version of Finale at the
Yeah,
time.
I've heard Encore before.
So I was able to get relatively inexpensive engraving software for my computer, and I just really started to mess with it. And everything I'd been doing was just piano because that's all I could play. I'd never really considered, oh, there's all these other instruments I can write for as well. And that wasn't really until I got to high school. I was in band and chorus, and I was just playing around with adding some other instruments on Encore. And I'd always had piano because I was really comfortable with it. And then I would have kind of like, I'd have the wind and string players just playing like whole note chords along with it. And my band director, he encouraged me. He's like, why don't you write this for like a full band? And I was like, I don't even know how to do that. And he was like, well, here's some scores of some things we're doing in class, and see what these other composers are doing and study that. I was like, okay, well, I was seeing what I noticed. Well, when the winds do a lot of flourishes, they're usually all doing it together and they're in different octaves. So I started to write down the different ranges of all the instruments and just kind of made my little notebook of like my cheat sheet to figure out what all these instruments could do. And the best thing that ever happened to me as far as feedback and to help me grow was I had my colleagues in high school play a piece of mine with my band director conducting, and I was just kind of like sitting there. I think I was 15, and they were playing this piece. It was super intense, and I felt like I was gonna burst out of my body. And I was hearing my music become real with real people. And I got real feedback. And teenagers, they don't hold back. They don't care if you're friends either. Like, I had the winds, they'd be like, "This is way too hard. There's too many notes." And the trombones were like, "I'm bored to tears. This is so easy." And the horns were like, "Our part's way too high. Why are you putting ledger lines?" So I learned a lot. It was definitely a learning experience. So, there were two ways I could take it. It would be like, you know what, this isn't for me. It's too hard. I don't know what I'm doing. But I took the other route and said, okay, I'm going to write you guys another piece that's more appropriate and hopefully better. And I just kept practicing what I was doing. And I eventually got more comfortable with what the individual instruments would do. And I would say, I've got these friends here who play these instruments, who have spent 5-6 years on their instruments. I'll just ask them what they can do. And I'd give little, like, can the trombones, can you guys play this? Or is this out of your range? Or if I give you a rhythm like this, is this going to work? And I did the same thing with the chorus. Now, I felt a little bit more comfortable with chorus because I had been a part of a choir, and I had sung soprano, I had sung alto, I was at the time singing tenor. I can't sing bass terribly well. My voice doesn't go quite as deep as a real bass does, but I understood the mechanics, and I had seen a lot of choral music. And the great thing about choral music is you see everybody's part. In band music and in orchestra music, you only see your part. So you don't always have that full realized score like you do in chorus.
Yeah.
So, that was really helpful. And I was writing choral music for my groups at school as well, and I got some of the same kind of feedback where, like the altos, I'm tired of singing a really boring alto line where it's the same note over and
Some
over.
of my altos who are listening to this will definitely appreciate that.
Yeah,
I've
so
done a lot of cool things. Some of my tenors and basses, appreciate your vocal journey as a kid with your voice change. Thanks for it kind of answering a lot of the questions that some of the
oh, okay. Well, good.
yeah.
Yeah, it happened to me too. My voice changed too.
One of my sixth graders, you were kind of transitioning to choral music. She said, Kate Estillo, she's one of my sixth grade kids, said, "How is composing choral music different from composing regular music?" And I guess by regular music,
Regular, like instrumental. It's all regular, right? No. So with choral music, one of the biggest challenges is the text. That with instrumental music, there's not. Sometimes there is a text that you become inspired by, and a work comes out of it, but you don't have to think so much about, okay, how are we going to sing these words? Versus with choral music, there is a text, and the text has to make sense. There's a give and take with setting words that make sense or don't make sense depending on how you're setting it, and the choices rhythmically and melodically that I make will change based on what's happening with the words. You wouldn't want to hold a word very, like the word and or the, for a very long time versus something like that has more importance within a line. Like if you're singing "the water is wide," so "wa" and "wide" would be the words that you'd want to put more emphasis on, and those would probably have more of an inflection melodically versus "the," "ter," and "the," or "is," right? You wouldn't want to hold "the water is wide," right? So musically, that wouldn't make as much sense, at least to me, than if I were to put something rhythmically with the certain syllables within the line. So the text kind of dictates what happens musically for me. Now that doesn't mean that there's only one way to do it, as I've seen with the same text being set many different times. The interpretation's different. The way the composer thinks about the text is going to be different from composer to composer. I might take a text and set it to a ballad that's very slow and has nice, long, sweeping melodic lines, and someone else might take that same text and make it very fast and rhythmic and repetitive and have a driving piano line, whereas my version might be a cappella, so there's no piano at all. But both interpretations might work equally well. But it does, for me, it starts with the text. I don't typically have a melody and then put words to it later. That's probably a harder task.
Yeah, I think some of my questions, kids wanted to know a little bit about the process of writing music, but let me, thank you for such a detailed explanation. I think that's helpful. And especially for you students, all my students who are watching this, we talk about the kids, some of them are both in band and chorus, how important our job is as choral singers to enunciate text. We talk about articulation all the time. So hopefully you appreciate, a composer like Bruce's meaningful ways that they're actively using text to paint a picture when they're writing for you. So I think that was well said, Bruce.
Thank you.
And speaking of lyrics and text, kind of segues into this next question from my sixth grader, Jared Bogart. He had 3 questions, but I chose one of his.
Okay.
And he says, what emotions do you want your audience to feel?
I think as composers, we always want to move our audiences, whether it's a state of excitement or a profundity with the text, or there's this song that I wrote when my daughter was born, and my wife, a very talented writer, she's actually a speech language pathologist, but and if you don't know what that means, she essentially works with children who have her specific role is she helps rehabilitate children who have cochlear implants. So essentially they were unable to hear. They were given implants, little magnetic implant, and then they can hear, and she helps them be able to speak, so that you'd never know that they have implants. So what she does is pretty amazing. But she is originally formerly a musical theater major. So she works a lot with text and sings a lot, and was a very talented, or is a very talented writer. And she wrote a text for me, and I set it to music, and it was about our daughter. And it's actually a piece on the website, on my website, called Slumber Child. And for me, I wanted to paint a picture of putting a child to sleep. So it's not a very loud rhythmic piece. It's a slow, very lullaby type work. And it to me, it works on kind of two levels. On one level, it's very basically a lullaby, lulling a child to sleep. But on another level, for the adults in the audience, I think it helps harken back to a time where their children were young, and we're seeing them grow, and no matter how old they are, they're still our child. So I tried to make that work on two different levels of emotion, so that not only children could make sense of it, because I've actually had the Raleigh Boy Choir sing that piece. We had the sopranos and altos, the children, sing the soprano and alto part, and then the tenor and bass, we had alumni come back and sing the lower voices. And I feel like all ages were able to see something in that text, even if you're not a parent. So I think just having something meaningful from the piece is always a goal. Now, whether or not that happens remains to be seen after the work is completed. But that's always the goal.
You definitely answered one of my students, Mayuri's question, and I kind of, can speak to some of the questions that I've read too. A lot of kids asking, where do you find inspiration? Or like Mayuri said, where do you find your inspiration to write meaningful music? Someone else, Lena, said, how do you find the inspiration to create certain types of songs? And it sounds like, one way to do that is by basically choosing something that's meaningful in your life, like being a parent, writing a song about something that, you can personally relate to.
Yeah, that's a great thing about choral music, is there are all of these wonderful texts that exist, but you can write your own text. It doesn't have to be a text that's already written. And much of my music is from older, well-known texts, but I do have several that are new, and most of those are my wife's words. I haven't written a lot of music with my own text before. I find that to be a challenge for me. I'd like to do more of it, but it's definitely a challenge, because it's different than just writing music, and I could write melodies and harmonies all day, but writing my own text doesn't come as naturally, but it comes really naturally to her. So I let her take care of a lot of that for me. So we make a good team.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of related to my student Vanilla is in sixth grade, and she says, was English one of your favorite subjects or writing, since composing has a lot to do with writing music and having words to tell a story?
To be honest, I struggled with English, and I don't know if just the way the classes were constructed, but for me, I feel as an adult, I've become more interested in reading and literature, but as a student, I was more of a math person. And I mean, music does have a lot of math. I mean, as you know, it's basically putting fractions together rhythmically. So I was always really, really good at rhythms. But the expressive part of it, I mean, math isn't really expressive. That's more of the literature, English part of it. And I don't know how that came into being with me, because English was not really that exciting of a subject for me in school. I was more interested in the math realm. And I mean, I enjoyed all of my music classes and being able to perform. But you know, if I was assigned a reading, I wasn't particularly excited about it as a student.
That's, you know, I it's interesting because I know that a lot of people say that math, you know, if you're good at music, then you might be good at math. I wasn't the other way around. I really enjoyed English, and math
Yeah,
was, you know, one of my strongest subjects.
yeah, and that's okay. You know, it's I think that's the great thing about music, is it incorporates many different subjects into
I
one.
totally agree. And this question comes from another sixth grader, Vaishna. You know, there was a few students who kind of wanted to know a little bit about the music writing process itself. She said, is it hard to come up with notes, or do you just put random notes and organize them? How do you come up with the melody and harmony to put in notes?
Well, I
And before you answer too, like
sure.
another kid, Aditi, he's also in sixth grade, you know, kind of related. It's like, what is the first step in the composing process? That's kind of, you know, maybe you can tie them in together.
The first step is always different for me. But now my process kind of revolves around me singing on my own without the piano. And a lot of times it hits me for whatever reason when I'm in the car driving and my kids are in the back screaming or doing something. So I'll pull out my phone to record me singing something. I try to wait for a stoplight so I'm safe, and I'll just record a melody or kind of an idea that I'm working with. It's not always necessarily a melodic line, but it might be something rhythmic that I'm thinking of, and I'll try to dictate what is this for. And you know, I might have a rhythmic line. I'll say, okay, this sounds like something that would work for an orchestra group, and the upper strings would go da 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 da, and then I want the lower lines to have something nice and legato underneath, or then moving to a pizzicato section. And then I'll just leave it at that, and then come on it when I'm able to really sit down and try to work on it. But I have tons of these recordings of just melodies and just ideas that I have, and I don't always get to use all of them. There's just not enough of time in the day, unfortunately, to realize all of it, which is okay. You know, you kind of work through, okay, I liked this, but it doesn't speak to me the same way that it did when I first heard it. So I'm going to go with this other melody that really works. And then sometimes I'm able to incorporate both things together. So a lot of times I try to come up with a meaningful melody. And from there, I can put underneath just a really simple harmonic structure. And I try not to make my final product just like chords with a melody. I try to make those chords and harmonies underneath have their own life as well, which makes me think more of, okay, the alto line, if I were just to put the chords underneath, you know, that's when the altos end up just having that same note because it works with all of the harmonies underneath. Well, the altos might not be that excited about that line. So I try to, okay, how can I make these harmonies work where the lower line also, like if I'm writing a treble piece, where the lower line also has something meaningful, but still fits my original ideas for the harmonies. And it works the same way, just like practicing using your voice or practicing an instrument. It comes with a lot of practice. I've written a lot of music, lots of short pieces, lots of pieces that I think aren't that great, but it helped me move to, okay, what worked well with this piece? Okay, let's use those things in this new piece. and what didn't work well, I'm not going to do that again. So it takes practice, just like any other art form. So, some of my early works are not that great, or they're a little too repetitive, or if I were to look at it now, it's like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. That's just awful. I don't want anyone to hear that. So it's definitely a learning curve to getting to where you really feel proficient. I'm still learning. I'm still finding things that I can do better, because I'm working with people who have done it even longer than I have, and provide something to me that I wasn't even thinking about, that they saw in my music, that that would work well with this piece as well. And just being really, really particular about every single note, bringing meaning into every note. So I think one of the questions was, do I just put random notes together? I try to make every note have a reason for why it's there.
Very awesome. Yeah, and just like anything, the more you practice, the more you do, the better, the better you get. Sophia McBride wants to know, kind of related to the, composition process, how long does it take to compose a song?
Great question. I have written some pieces in a day. I have taken months on others. A typical choral work, if I'm just really, really feeling it, or I've just got this idea that I've got to get out, I can write it in a day or two, but that's not very often. That sometimes happens. A typical choral piece will take me a few weeks to write, to really, really dig into it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll find a text that I like, and I'll kind of sit on it for a few weeks before I really start to write the piece. So I guess if you looked at the text, having the text, really thinking about the text and what it means to me, and then actually writing the work after that, I mean, it could be several weeks. But there was this one piece I wrote. It was a text from my wife, Watercolor Sky. She wrote the text over the summer. We were spending time in New Smyrna Beach in Florida, and she was out on the balcony, saw this beautiful sunset in Florida, and she wrote this wonderful text. And I sat on it for a few months, but then when I finally felt like, okay, I really have an idea of what I want to do, I wrote that piece in like 24 hours. But I had the text for a while. So if you kind of put all that together, I guess the work took a few months to write, even though the physical composition part of it only took me a day. Whereas a lot of times with like an orchestra or a concert band work, especially concert band takes me a long time to write. There's so many considerations and so many instruments to work with, especially the more difficult. On to put the whole thing together. Worked on other projects while I was working on that, just because of deadlines and other things that I was working on. So there's a wide range. There's no one definitive amount of time that it takes me to write a piece. So some people write really fast all the time. Some people take a long time to write all the time, and that's totally fine. It's all about being comfortable with your process to get the end result that you want.
Rashika and Sanvi in 7th grade want to know, they had similar questions. What would you consider the most challenging aspect of composing music? I'm sure there's a lot of different challenges.
Yes. So I sometimes have times where I'm writing something and I'm like, this is awful. I don't like this at all. And I don't know how I'm going to use this. And I don't know why I thought this was going to be a good idea. And I'll take a break from it, and then I'll come back. I'm like, oh, this is great. What was I thinking? And then I'll come back to it later. I'm like, no, this is terrible. And I just have this kind of inner war of, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Is it going to be as good as the last piece I wrote? Am I going to run out of ideas? Am I going to have someone else who wants to commission a work? So it's definitely just like keeping that drive going is definitely a challenge. And I found that it's okay to take breaks. That a lot of times I hear, while this isn't bad advice to write something every day, I think it's important to sometimes take a step back and take a break. I love writing, and composition is what I do all the time. But there are days where I won't write anything, and then I'll come back like, man, I haven't written in like 2 or 3 days, and then I'll have an awesome day. That if I had written those 2 or 3 days, I don't know that awesome day would have happened. So it's just being okay with taking breaks and not feeling the pressure to always have something written has been a challenge for me, because I'll feel guilty if I'm doing something else. It's like, I could have been spending that time writing this music, or I could have been reaching out to someone else about writing something else, and just kind of saying, okay, I've been working on other things. It may not have been composition related, but I was still working, or I was spending time with my kids and my family, and we were having a good time. And that was a special moment that if I had been writing, I would have missed it. So just kind of maintaining that balance, that if I'm constantly writing and pushing everything else away, I'll become like a crazy mad scientist, right?
Thanks for explaining that. I think it's
Yeah.
like anything that you do, it's important to take breaks to continue to be inspired and to give your brain, the space that it needs to come back and be refreshed. It takes a lot of emotion.
That refresh word was good. I definitely feel refreshed when I've taken a few days off, and it just really creates, I find that it creates a lot more special music for me, and that I otherwise would have probably missed if I hadn't refreshed myself.
Shruti in 7th grade wants to know, did it take a lot of time for your music to get published?
Yes. Fun story about that. So I was very fortunate to have my first piece published at the age of 19. I had a piano solo that I submitted to a competition that was geared towards educational music. So I wrote this piece. It's called Dance of Fire, and I actually wrote the piece when I was 17, and I have got the manuscript around here somewhere. And I entered it into a competition. It was the Lynn Freeman Olson competition, and I did not win. But one of the judges said, I hope you'll take our feedback and re-enter your piece when we have the competition again in 2 years. So I was on the fence about it. When it was time for me to re-enter, I was in college and I was working on other compositions, and I didn't really want to work on this little piano solo that I had worked on. But I got a call from one of the judges, and he was like, I really hope you're going to resubmit that piece. And I was like, okay. So I made the changes that they suggested, and I re-entered the piece, and I won the competition that year. And I was thrilled. I could not believe it. And one of the perks of winning that competition was the piece was submitted to several publishers who had, the opportunity to pick it up if they wanted to. And Alfred Music decided they were gonna pick it up. And I was like, here's my window. Here's my chance. Now I've got an in. Everything's going to get published now. Well, that is not what happened. I did not get my next big piece published until 9 years later. And so I had finished my undergraduate degree in that time. I had taught high school chorus for 4 years, and I had gone to 2 more years of graduate school to do my master's in composition. So I had done a lot more soul searching and working on my process and what I was doing. And when I was commissioned to write a choral piece in, I guess this would have been 2013, and I just wrote a piece for them that worked for that group. It was an SSA piece with piano accompaniment. It used the Emily Dickinson text, "Hope is the thing with feathers." And I wasn't thinking about publication. I was just thinking about, I am actually getting paid to write a piece for a group, and they're going to perform it, and I'm going to be able to attend to the performance. That's amazing. I can't believe this is happening. And I was, I guess at the time I was 26, 27. And I got a pretty decent recording of the performance, and I had my former high school chorus teacher was in the audience, and she was like, "I know the former choral editor at Alfred who can put you in touch with the current editor. You should send the piece to them and see what they think." I was like, okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I have nothing to lose. So I got the information, I sent the piece off, and they said, "We'll take it." And then I kind of started rethinking about, okay, that was cool. What else can I do? So I started writing some more choral works, kind of in the vein of how that piece worked out. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But I had this choral piece that I felt, okay, I've done my training. I've got my master's now in composition. I've really become much more comfortable with what I'm doing versus when I was 19, or I guess 17, when I wrote that piano solo the first time. I still was trying to figure things out. And I mean, I'm still trying to figure things out, but I felt much more comfortable. And so I started making sense of, okay, what's it like to submit a piece? What kinds of things are they looking for? And what kinds of things do they accept? And what's the process after that? Because, some publishers, they like to edit your work just to make it more marketable. Others, they'll leave it alone. Some will really tear it up to make it work. Like B instead, so I have to kind of merge the parts together. So I started submitting, and I started getting comfortable with reaching out to other publishers, and things started. And I've been very fortunate the last few years to have several things work out for me. But it's certainly been, what did one of my editors said, good to shop your music around, because everybody's looking for something different. And that's what I've done. I've taken that advice, and it's worked out. So it took a while to really feel confident and get those things going. But I still receive those rejections, and that's okay.
Thanks. I think that's super well put. I might have time for like one more or two more.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Emily Regalado wants to know if you've ever conducted one of your own pieces and what your favorite voicing to write for choir music is, SATB, SSA, or two-part.
So I have conducted. I've conducted a full orchestra with winds and strings and percussion. I've conducted concert bands. I've done a lot of musical theater conducting behind a piano. So I've set my piano in front. I've got my pit orchestra, and then I've got the singers up on the stage. I've had to do that before. And I have conducted choral groups without being behind the piano. I will say having someone else play is much easier than having to do both, but I've been able to manage. I frequently am the accompanist though, and I like that role too, just playing. Even if it's my work, I've accompanied my own music while someone else is conducting it, which is really cool. And my favorite voicing to write for, there is something about a great SSA piece. I love writing for that voicing. But there is something really satisfying about a two-part piece, a really good two-part where the two parts are very independent of one another. But I don't know. I guess I like all of them because I am gonna say there are things you can do with an SATB choir that you can't do with SSA or two-part. But a lot of times it depends on the text as to which way I'll go. But I do really love an SSA work. I mean, my first choral piece that was published was an SSA work. And it was really enjoyable to write. There's something you can really make those tight harmonies with the SSA, and that second soprano just sits really, really nicely for me.
Awesome. Good question, Emily. I have one more question, depending on how much time we have. I know we're probably approaching the end. Hopefully we can, maybe I can commission you to write a piece for our chorus in Parsippany here someday. That would be super cool.
I would love to do that. That would be wonderful.
Julia Bruggerman is in 8th grade, and she wants to know what kind of classes you had to take to become a composer.
Yes. So I did an undergraduate degree in college, my bachelor's of music, and I actually did 2 degrees. I did a composition and theory degree. It was 1 degree, music theory. And I did a bachelor's in music education. And I took a funny route. I probably should have gone the choral route because I was much more well versed in that. But I went to school to be a band director, and I ended up teaching chorus. And I teach chorus now, and I've written more chorus music than anything else. But I went to school to be a band director. But for my composition degree, we had to take, I think, for my undergraduate degree, I took 7 semesters of music theory. So that was a lot of music theory. And we had to take music history courses. I took 4 semesters of music history, and we did ear training classes. So for the 7 theory classes, I think 4 of them had like an ear training component. And then I had, more specifically for composition, I had a composition lesson every week with my composition professor. And he would assign certain things for me to work on. And I remember my first assignment was write a piano solo with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that was the assignment. And it was for me to interpret what that meant. And I had a week to do it. I came back in, I had a full piece, boom. Then my next lesson, he was like, I want you to write a melody in every church mode. So we talked about church modes. And so it's basically like you've got your major and minor scale, and then there are other scales that exist with that. I'm not going to give you a big music theory lesson, and this is for your kids. But I took all of the different modes and just wrote a simple melody. And then from there, he was like, okay, now take a melody or 2 from that and write a piece we have these 4 instrumentalists that are willing to play some new composers' works. So I had to just write for those instruments. And it was just this combination of instruments you don't really hear very often, but they were willing to play. So you make it work. And that was a lot of my undergraduate writing. Was we would write for instrumentalists or singers who were willing to perform our works. So if I had a tenor who wanted to sing a piece of mine and a French horn player who wanted to play, all right, we've got a tenor vocalist, a French horn, and I'm going to play piano. Here's our piece. So we just kind of made work whatever we had so we could practice writing and practice getting a performance. That was always the goal, was getting it performed, getting it recorded, showing that you went through all of the steps. And it wasn't just writing for practice, it was writing for performance, having it documented that you had real players, you had real feedback from someone who is human and not your computer. Because it's really different. The computer can do some amazing things that humans can't do. So it's really important to get a real player and how that becomes realized in the end. And then when I did my master's degree, it was much more specific for just composition. And so a lot of my academic classes I didn't have to do anymore. And I just wrote a lot of music. And I wrote a lot of large ensemble things. And I got to listen to, like, there was this thing at my graduate institution where every year the symphony orchestra did a composer's concert, which was awesome. And so several of us in the studio would write a full orchestra piece for the symphony orchestra to work on. And they had a rehearsal or two with the composers. And even if you didn't write one, if one of the composers in the studio didn't write one, you came to those rehearsals. And the composer got to sit behind the conductor and work one-on-one with the conductor, and then have the ensemble play. And I was like, okay, I've got 2 years to make this work. I'm going to write one each year. And we made it work, and I've got documentation of those pieces, and it was just a lot of writing and really figuring out how music works. So a lot of music classes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bruce. I seriously appreciate your time. I'm super excited to share, our conversation with my students. In this crazy time of teaching digitally, I think it's really awesome and important to keep human connection.
Yes. I'm doing it too.
Yeah, tomorrow's my first time I'm experimenting with having a Google Meet. We're not going to use Zoom to start with, but I'm meeting with my kids tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to
luck.
Hopefully seeing who's able to connect and to talk with them. So I'll probably share pending when Larry has our recording ready, maybe I'll share our interview with them on Wednesday.
Awesome. I love it.
And I'll probably have it up on YouTube and on our website in less than an hour. It doesn't take long. That's the cool part about this whole thing.
You're awesome. Larry, seriously, thank you for organizing, with your company and with publishing. And, it's such a cool thing to bring composers and musicians and teachers together and, provide a new aspect of how music is created to my students. I'm really looking forward to sharing with them. And Bruce, I hope to continue a relationship with you, and I'm happy to share some feedback from my students.
Yeah, please do.
I'm sure I can get your contact details, or I have your email address too, so I can.
Yeah. Anytime. I'm pretty approachable. So.
And that's the cool part is a lot of the composers, at least that I've worked with over the many years I've been in this business, are super willing to give of their time and energy, and because most of them are educators as well, so they're willing to do that. So I'm thankful that you were able to put this together, and we're going to continue to do it with more composers along the way. Thanks, Adam, and thanks, Bruce Tippette, for being a composer today. And we'll talk to you all again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Larry.
Bye.
Bye, Adam.